Welcome back. All right, review time. So, quite a bit of albums came out last week. There is the Julia Holter album that is not on this list. I may throw that into the next Aftermath because it is quite an extensive record, and I haven't been able to get through it consistently yet because I've constantly been getting busy. And I've been wanting to return to a lot of these records just to make sure that my critiques and also my views on these albums are the most concise and the most solid that they can be. Especially considering that we had one of the biggest drops of the year with Future Metro Boomin We Don't Trust You. So the critic score right now is a 56 and a user score is a 71. So I am fairly new to Future and his discography. I started listening to Future probably around more consistently around when The Wizard dropped. I do really like that project. That's probably still my favorite Future album. So I'm still kind of getting into the sound of what Future is going for. But with this album, I appreciate that there is a little bit more of an emphasis on kind of the lyricism and a little bit more of the flow play that is going on this album. We know that the production on this album is going to be great. And the production on here is great. And it does provide a little bit of different avenues that Future can go through when it comes to production. I'm thinking of Everyday Hustle with Rick Ross. Amazing song. An amazing feature from Rick Ross, too, which I was quite surprised. Of course, there's Like That with Kendrick Lamar. I mean, the verse just speaks for itself. It's so refreshing and so exciting to have this kind of hunger and this kind of tenacity back into hip hop because it feels like it's been gone for years. And every time a diss has been thrown for the past couple of years, it's these very slight and also very hidden kind of subliminal shots. I'm so glad that someone, especially on Kendrick's caliber and Kendrick's level, is finally just putting it out as it is. And it just allows rap to be interesting again, which is very welcome. But besides that too, the instrumental and Future does a really great job on that song there as well. And honestly, this whole record is pretty great. I like it quite a bit. But there's an issue that I have once you kind of go past the absolute Mount Everest peak that is Like That. It starts to slowly skitter down into a little bit to where the album can become samey and the album can kind of overstay its welcome. I'm particularly thinking of After Running Out of Time, which is a decent track. It's grown on me a bit. But songs like Fried, songs like GTA, for example, they kind of just fill the gap and fill the void of just kind of just letting the album run to its runtime. It just kind of, those songs towards the latter end of this album don't really do a lot for me. And if this album was trimmed down just by a couple more tracks, I feel like this album could really shine as one of Future's best records. And honestly, one of Metro's best collaborative projects. So when I take into the last little bit into account on this record, because it does get pretty spotty after Running Out of Time, and especially after Slimed In, which is probably my favorite track. I love kind of the instrumental is kind of has this like this cyclical kind of feel to it where the synth or the sample is kind of switching and reversing back and forth. And I really like the melodic chorus that Future brings on that chorus. It's probably my favorite song on the album. So after Slimed In, I feel like this album does go in a little bit of peaks and valleys. And with that, I'm going to be giving it a 7 out of 10, which I do think is rather fair. Is there potential to grow on me? I totally believe there is. So right now, it's a 7 out of 10. I may do a thing like I did for Vultures 1, where I may return to this album a month later to see if anything has changed. So now we move on to Adrianne Lenker. So I'm just going to go over the numbers for this one. I've already reviewed this on a separate video. The video is doing great, by the way. I'm so thankful that people are watching it. But it has a critic score of an 87 and a user score of an 86. Just to quickly paraphrase, my favorite record of the year. gives me some of the most heartwarming and also sad feelings on a record that I have heard in quite some time. The last time I felt about a record like this was Punisher back in when I discovered it back in 2021. That kind of gives you all you need to know, especially when you take into context that Punisher is probably one of my favorite albums of all time, if not my favorite album of all time. So if you want to see the review itself in its entirety, I'm going to be posting the link down below in the description. I highly recommend you watch it. I feel very confident and feel very happy of how that video came out. So then we move on to Matt Champion with Mika's Laundry. So there is no critic review for this thing, but it is at currently a 74, which is pretty positive. And with this record, I was really interested to see where Matt Champion was going to go as a solo artist. And I feel like with this album, there is definitely a template of where this is going to go. In particular, my favorite track, Steel, I really like the pop kind of leaning direction that it's kind of going for. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Brockhampton still, but with Steel, it kind of shows that Matt Champion does have a nice little bit of vocal range, and on this album there is a little bit of experimentation going on there as well. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it's kind of Matt Champion trying to find what his identity is across this album. And sometimes you get tracks like Steel, and then other times you get kind of songs that kind of just meander, or they don't feel like they're going to a concise or a cohesive direction. So there isn't really a lot to say about this record for me, in my opinion. It's still a decent listen if you're looking to see what Matt Champion is doing as a solo artist. I think there is some welcome and some really good tracks on here. But for its current state, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. It's still a good record. I do feel like this is the feeling out process to lead to future records that is going to give a little bit more of an idea of what Matt Champion brings as a solo artist and what he can bring to the table. So now we move on to Joyner Lucas with Not Now, I'm Busy. So it has a critic score of a 52 and a user score of a 40. So I remember listening to ADHD, and I was just utterly blown away of how disappointing and how just bad the record was. Not Now I'm Busy is an improvement over ADHD. It's not a big improvement, but it's an improvement. There is a run of tracks on here that bring up just this feeling that I got from 508, 507, 2209. I think that's the phone number that the mixtape was called, where you did get the moments of introspection. You did get the moments of emotion. And Joyner Lucas, I remember on that mixtape that he could really dive into some really cool aspects and perspectives on mental health, on depression, on suicide, and all these other kind of topics that encapsulate mental health. There are parts on here that do kind of go into that. In particular, I can't remember the name of the track, but it's the track, honestly, with Jelly Roll is the best track on here, and I was expecting it to be totally garbage. But the way that it works out is Jelly Roll brings a really good chorus, and Joyner is focused and he sounds passionate, and there is a drive to bring a message with the song. Now, of course, rap has always been a thing where it's flexing money, flexing women, flexing your lyrical prowess or how good of a rapper you are. That's always been a thing. But with Joyner Lucas, I feel that with ADHD and this album as well, there's just a lot of words being spewed out, but there is nothing to them. This is dime a dozen rap for the braggadocio when it comes to what you hear in rap pretty much all the time. The only difference is that Joyner Lucas is very technical. He can rap very fast, but he's really not making those lyrics and making those moments stick to make you kind of pay attention. It just kind of becomes a fast rapper to the point where it becomes background noise, or it becomes something that just I'm not really interested in. I am of the perspective that fast rap needs to be done with precision, and it needs to be done with the purpose. I do believe you still have to put content into your fast raps. For example, Jid is the pinnacle when it comes to rapping fast, changing up flows to still keep the intensity up, but he's still bringing content and he's still paying attention to detail when it comes to those lyrical moments and when it comes to those faster paced tempos and those faster paced flows. Joyner Lucas is at a point where he's saying all of these words, but doesn't really mean anything towards the end of the song. Not really. It just kind of goes in one ear and out the other. And honestly, that's what this whole album is. It can run very boring, and there's quite a bit of tracks on here that just do not really work out. One of the least favorites is probably Broski, where I guess it's in the perspective of a fan that's really trying to idolize Joyner Lucas, but then he grows to hate Joyner Lucas. And the latter portion of the song almost is trying to make it a little bit experimental, where the bass is getting really tinny, it's getting very loud, and it's getting very aggressive in the mix. And where another artist would be able to pull that off and kind of bring another lyrical focus to make that kind of stand out on its own. With this song, it just feels like a lot of noise and it just really actually grates on your ears. It's just a song that for me is probably one of the worst tracks on this album. Not a worst song of the year contender per se, but overall, there's really just, even though I've probably spent the most time talking about this album, there really isn't a lot to discuss when it comes to main focal points when it comes to lyricism. Also, the production is very just dime a dozen. You can get this production on BeatStars, you can get this production on Type Beats. There really isn't anything standing out production wise either. So, with that, it's hard to really rate a boring album because there's nothing about it that is outright terrible, but there is nothing that is outright good. But there is so much more boring than there is interesting. So with that, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. Again, the Jelly Roll track is decent, but I definitely wouldn't consider it a favorite track of mine. So then we end off with SiR, with Heavy. So this would be my first full SiR listen. And with this album, I was thoroughly impressed when it comes to just the really smooth R&B, but there's also moments like I believe it's No Evil that kind of give a little bit more of a harsher kind of hip hop direction. And I was talking about Karma in my Before the Drop video, which conveniently enough had the Isaiah Rashad feature. What I really like about that song is that the R&B start of it is just a really smooth, sensual vibe. But the way Isaiah Rashad comes in and changes the flow multiple times, it almost changes the intensity. It changes the feeling of that song. It is a really good kind of, you get one song, but you get almost another song mixed in with the exact same instrumental. It just really shows how versatile you can make an instrumental and a beat, even just in all one song. So the album starts off pretty good, but I think when it really picks up its pace, when I believe it's like 6 days or 6 days long or 6 days over. I don't really know the full name of it, but that song is so dynamic. It's so interesting the way that it changes its tempo. It changes the BPM completely changes on the chorus. It slows right down. It goes back up to its original pace. And the way that SiR kind of rides this is just really good. It's really interesting, and it keeps the performance and keeps the song really dynamic. And when you go across this album, after that point, it gets more interesting. You have the track with Anderson .Paak, and Anderson .Paak brings a great performance. You get, I believe it is Not Human with Absol. Absol brings a great performance. And then you get, I believe it is either Vicky's song or Ricky's song. I don't know the full name. I'm not the greatest with album titles, especially doing it on the fly here. But I really like the change of content where this song talks about kind of the perspective of police brutality and police profiling, racial profiling in an R&B context, which I saw on Free TC all the way back in 2015 with Ty Dolla $ign. But SiR brings his trademark really good voice. The beat is really good. It's kind of a little bit more of kind of meditative. It's a little bit more kind of, I guess, more R&B-ish, I guess. It's not kind of following into that weird kind of blend of hip-hop and R&B, but it kind of sticks to its own tradition, and it just really sounds nice, and it really allows the lyrical focus to be full front and center. And my favorite track on here is Brighter, which is the closer. It's just a full-on gospel song, and I feel like SiR really, really does well in that. And it brings this album to a really nice close where it feels like it's a happy ending. It feels kind of celebratory, And after the kind of really nice kind of feeling this album brings, it's so nice to get a closer that kind of covers all of its bases when it comes to the emotions that are brought through this album and kind of ended off on a higher note. So probably out of these albums, the SiR's Heavy is probably the one that impressed me the most. So much so that I'm going to be giving it an 8 out of 10. I really liked it, and it probably will be in my top albums of the year. It's getting to the point where I'm probably going to have like top 30, top 40 albums, and it's going to be my biggest list by far. But SiR really impressed me this week. So that one worked out really nice. And then, of course, the Adrianne Lenker album. Again, I'm going to be posting that review in the description. So that is all the aftermath of this week. We have the Trippie Redd and MGK album, which is going to be a fun listen per se. And we also get the Beyonce album, which I believe is called Carter Cowboy. So we have two albums, vastly different genres, vastly different audiences, and it's going to be an interesting week to say the least. So thank you very much for watching this very in-depth review of all of these records, and I will talk to you again soon.